Hello, friends, and welcome to our program. Pro-life leader Frank Pavone here of Priests for Life. Today, we are joined with someone that we have known for decades, and for those decades, he has been providing objective, scientifically valid research about abortion. We're going to talk today with our friend and colleague, David Reardon of the Elliot Institute. David, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you.
We go way back, and your book, Aborted Women Silent No More, was a big impact on us. When I was first getting involved in pro-life activism full-time, it was one of the first books I read. And Janet Morana, same thing. And of course, as years went by, we had the Silent No More campaign arise. And it very much had roots in what that book was telling us about, how women who have had abortions are impacted in a very, very negative way. So this is an area that you've been researching for such a long time. And tell our viewers, first of all, what the Elliot Institute is, why it has that name, and what you've been doing all these decades.
Well, like I said, so my first book, I was introduced to Nancy Jo Mann, who founded WEBA, Women Exploited by Abortion.
Right.
And she was going around just talking about her experience, and she was trying to offer support for other women who were suffering grief after their abortions.
Right.
She'd been through a traumatic second trimester abortion, saw her aborted baby, and had issues with substance abuse for many years, and almost died in an accident. And she came to a conversion and felt that maybe God was leading her to help other women because others must be going through what she did.
Yes.
And it just struck me at the time, this was back in the early 80s.
80s, yes.
That everybody's talking about either abortion as a legal issue or as whose rights prevail, the women's or the babies or whatever, and no one's talking about what women actually go through in experiencing the grief, how they work through it, how they find healing. And I just felt that was a part of the debate that we need to draw attention to, because if women are grieving, the fact that my baby died in an abortion is something that people should consider and understand, because it builds relationship with the aborted child.
Right.
And so I just thought it'd be a one-year project, to be honest, that I was going to help her draw together stories, and I was going to write them up because I was a writer at the time, and I just thought, this will, but it turned into like a 3-year project, and then when we got done with that, I felt a need. The other side was saying, well, these are rare. This isn't, it doesn't happen often. So I wanted to do a national survey of women to show that it was widespread.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to raise some money for the national survey, and so I established a nonprofit organization so people could donate for the survey and establish the Elliot Institute. And Elliot is a derivative of Elijah. So that's kind of why
that was the inspiration for that.
Yeah. There was no rich Uncle Elliot who funded it. So we can change the name if there's the rich Uncle Jacobs. If you want Jacob Institute, send the rich uncles my way.
Exactly. Well, the whole idea of research is so important. I mean, we have these public issues, abortion, one of the most contentious, and everybody's got an opinion, right? Or they think they have an opinion. But it's like, what is it based on? And you think about that old adage, everybody has a right to his own opinion, but nobody has a right to his own facts. And you try to get to the facts as best as we can ascertain them, right? Interviewing women. But it's a challenge too, isn't it, when you think about this question, okay, I want to research, what does abortion do to the woman who has it? It's one thing what it does to the baby. Advocates of abortion always want to just deny what it does to the baby. But they also deny what it does to the woman. They present it as, oh, this is good. This is good for women. This is healthcare. This is helpful, whatever they want to say it is. But to actually research that, the ins and outs, the challenges of that. And one of them that comes to mind right away, and I've seen you write about this over the years, is that if someone has had such a traumatic experience from their abortion, isn't that one of the things that they want least to talk about,
right,
or to think about? But in order to do research on the impact it had, well, you got to kind of talk to them and have them think about it, right? How do you overcome that problem?
Well, I mean, so to begin with, with the first book, we were talking to women who were participating in post-abortion grief. So these are women who were acknowledging their grief and were seeking help from other women.
Okay.
So I use an analogy that was basically, if you want to study a disease, you don't go study healthy people. You talk to the people who have the disease and find the symptoms.
Okay.
And so, we learn from them, we find the symptoms, and then when we do our research on the general population of women, we know what questions to ask, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
Right.
For example, kind of to counter a study done by a pro-abortion researcher, they included in the list of negative factors. We recently did a study where we covered like 15 negative risk factors. They only asked about 5, and 3 of them were overlapping: sad, blue, or whatever. And one was disappointed, which I never ever heard a woman refer to. Her key emotion after an abortion was disappointed. Like, where did they come up with that? So, they kind of pluck it out of there, I think, in part because they knew they'd get low response rates, and then they lumped all those together. They didn't report them separately. They averaged them all out.
So it would pull down the negative.
They put the disappointed in because that pulled it all down. And then they could say, oh, relief was more common than negative reactions, but they never reported. We asked, can you give us a breakdown on what each of their negative reactions were? Oh, no.
Okay.
And they wouldn't share the data. Actually, they defied a request from HHS for the data. So the effort to try to portray abortion as always beneficial to women, they don't declare that, but it's a major goal of the abortion industry is to give the false impression that every abortion is freely wanted and every abortion helps women, and it's very rare for women to complain. In fact, the opposite is true.
The opposite.
The vast majority of women feel pressured to have abortions that go against their conscience, and the majority have negative reactions, but the lie has to be maintained that abortion's safe. Good.
Going all the way back to the days of President Reagan, his Surgeon General, C. Everett Koop, Reagan asked him, what is the effect of abortion on women? Bring us through that story, and then the response that Koop gave to Reagan, and then fast forward to today. Have we solved the problem? Have we done enough research?
Yeah, well, so Koop was asked to do a report on the health effects of abortion on women, and the presumption was, because he was very pro-life, that he would come out lambasting abortion. Now, Koop was at that time actually enjoying a lot of support from the liberal media because of his stand on safe sex against AIDS.
Okay.
And he had embraced use of condoms and safe sex. And so he was getting, he's doing a lot better job than we feared. So he was being a little bit courted by the media. And plus he felt that, the focus on the women was a mistake for the pro-life movement, that we should just focus on the baby. So basically, he gathered evidence, and the evidence was because there wasn't any really good research. And he basically admitted truly that all the studies have flaws, and if you really want to do this research, he wrote in his letter, you need to do a 5-year longitudinal study where you track people all the time. Okay. And it'll cost you that much money, a certain amount of money. But I can't make any determination based on the science.
And longitudinal meaning that you follow the woman over the course of years, right?
Yes, so there's a number of longitudinal studies done by the government all the time, where basically they get a group of people and they interview them every year.
Every year.
Just a random sample of people. So if you interview a random sample of 10,000 women over 5 years, a certain number of them will have had abortions during that time, and you can kind of track. So now, that was never done. There is, in the I guess almost 40 years since all that happened, there are a couple longitudinal studies that weren't really designed to do this, but kind of overlap enough information. So there's a couple studies done by Paul Sullins based on what's called the Adolescent Health Survey, where they interviewed women for a number of years, and he found very clearly, after controlling for 25 different factors, including prior mental health, that there was an independent effect of abortion on negative mental health outcomes. It's the best study done, and it's totally ignored by the pro-abortionists. You'll never see it ever cited by them. They don't even respond to it. They just pretend it doesn't exist, which is their way of, I've almost 50 studies they've published, and they just pretend we pretty much don't exist.
That brings up an important issue. Now, we've been talking with you for decades, other researchers too, that you and I both know, done fantastic work in looking at the negative impacts of abortion. And this is a problem that so many refer to, that, look, we do the research, we follow all the principles and the methodologies that go into solid research, but that's not the end of the story. You get the political bias on the part of publications, or even if you do get something published, then there are these wars that ensue about retraction, right? People on the other side don't like it, or those that are just, they don't want a bad word said about abortion. Tell us about that whole battle and how we overcome that.
Well, I'm not sure how we overcome it. We just have to kind of persist in it, like you
Yes.
said. And that's one reason, for example, Priscilla Coleman, which is, I assume, one of the things to talk about. So she had done one study based on the national representative sample of women using data that was collected by another group, longitudinal study. She did an analysis, and the other side came back and did a counter-analysis, and they found a little bit difference because there were some different weightings and things that they did. But anyway, they turned that into a big issue. Oh, we found something different. And that's in part underscores the fact that with the Sullivan's study, that's also publicly available. They've not challenged his because he didn't make any minor errors, and so they just pretend it doesn't exist. But like you said, so they're very anxious they've tried to retract a paper get a paper I published in the BMJ, retracted. The BMJ declined to retract it. They went after
That's British Medical Journal.
British Medical Journal. So they're losing in the field of evidence, so they're trying to get retractions using their political power and their money, because if they can attack, it turns into ad hominem attacks too. They're attacking the researchers because the evidence keeps turning against them. So one thing I was going to say, here's a good thing, something that most people would have never heard, but we have several studies published and a meta-analysis published in a respected journal showing that when you link death certificates to reproductive health history, and we've done this in Denmark and in California, and it was also done in Finland and in a couple other countries. Every study shows that the death rate after abortion is higher in the year following abortion than childbirth. So the claim that abortion is safer than childbirth is 12 times safer, the risk, that's totally a lie.
Yeah.
But you never get reported. And those studies should have been published in top peer-reviewed journals.
Yes.
But they're in second tier because the top ones, they just don't even accept, as soon as we send it, no, this isn't of interest to our readers.
Right.
Literally, I get from editors, this isn't of interest to our which is obviously abortion, a very high profile, important subject.
Exactly.
And no, we're not interested in
well, you see, and that's the challenge.
Abortion.
The challenge I'm always making to the supporters of abortion is if you are going to assert that you care about women's health, and you even present abortion as an aspect of women's health, then don't you want to look at the question of how abortion impacts women's health? Right. It's just to be honest, to be transparent, but these people aren't.
Well, and even the pro-abortion side, every study that they've ever done identifies at least some subgroup of women who have severe psychological issues with their abortions. So that leads them to ask the question, well, why? And so they've published in their papers, they had prior mental health issues, or they had ambivalence, or they were too religious, or whatever. So in the process, they're identifying what we call risk factors. These are risk factors that predict which women are having more problems. A couple of them even have written in their papers, this can be used at the abortion clinics to screen. Well, we know as a fact the abortion clinics don't screen for any of these things. And they don't do
that. So let's delve into this for a moment, because I think our audience will find this fascinating and helpful as a talking point. You're saying that based on the research, we know that there are certain conditions that woman might have, either in her health or in her experience or in her attitudes or beliefs. There are certain conditions that we can identify if we ask her, right, or look into her history, that would make an abortion more harmful to her. Is that the right way to say
it?
Right.
It's
so
very predictable that she's going to go home and cry for weeks and years and never recover.
So the abortion clinic, whoever's receiving her in there, taking the initial paperwork, doing the initial questioning, and we know very often that doesn't even happen, they could have these risk factors in front of them, and they could assess her like this is likely to be a much more traumatic experience for you than you're expecting today, right? But they don't do that.
Right. So everywhere else in medicine, you have to screen and make a decision whether or not the procedure is going to hurt or benefit the patient.
Right.
So ophthalmologists who do LASIK surgery, they look at your eyeball and they decide, are you going to get good results or not? And believe it or not, they turn away 20% of people looking for a LASIK surgery because they say, you're not going to get good results. but they never say that at an abortion clinic.
Well, right. In other
never
words, the
say-
LASIK surgery guy doesn't say, "Oh, well, it's your choice, so I'm going to do it." Right.
I'm just going. In fact, he doesn't just say, "You don't." He insists on looking at your eyeball.
Yeah.
He doesn't let anybody walk in and say, "I want some LASIK surgery," and he says, "Jump up on the table, we'll do it."
Right.
He's always going to examine: are you going to get good results? Because they care about you. The abortion clinics don't care about for the abortion clinic, I guess I don't want to be overly broad.
Right.
I'm sure many people in the clinics honestly believe they're helping women.
Right.
In fact, they hire a lot of women who are post-abortive because those women are hoping that maybe I can help other women get through it better than I did, right? And they're struggling with their own issues. So, but there is a well-documented history of the abortion movement growing out of the population control movement where they are targeting low-income people, they're targeting blacks, they're targeting people they feel there's too many of. We don't want this young girl bringing another baby into the world, right?
Right.
So they are not impartial to, like an ophthalmologist. They're impartial. They don't. Even though they might profit from your having it, it's not like they're changing the society and reducing the carbon footprint of the population. So the bottom line is abortion clinics not only have financial motive, but a lot of them have ideological motives, driving them to encourage abortion. In fact, the cost of abortion is artificially kept far lower than every other medical surgery.
You don't see the prices going up. Yeah.
Right. There was a study done years ago, but the bottom line is it should be, if it kept up with other kinds of medical procedures, it should be like $4,000 instead of $400.
$400, right.
So it's artificially kept low, and not only artificially kept low, but you have foundations giving money to clinics to do abortions on women who say they can't pay for it because they're so darn anxious to make sure they keep the abortion rates as high as possible.
Amazing. Well, friends, if you're just joining us, we're talking with Dr. David Reardon of the Elliot Institute, a key researcher on the question of abortion and its impact on women and others. David, one of the things too, of course, that is at the foundation of people like yourself being able to do good objective research is record keeping. And we have now in the United States a new administration, new people taking the reins at the Centers for Disease Control, at the Department of HHS. I wanted to ask you about record keeping because it's kind of deficient in the United States, isn't it? I mean, I know that for some of the studies that you and others have done, you mentioned Denmark before. You go to other countries precisely because the health record keeping is different than it is in the U.S. Tell us a little bit about all that.
Yeah, so in some countries there's an abortion registry, so that every time an abortion is done, there's records identifying the person so they can link to other records to identify if they have psychological issues, suicide, other things following the abortion. That's what's absent here. I mean, we really do need a national abortion registry, which would be anonymous. Obviously, this is not publicly available information who's having the abortion, but for medical research and follow-up and for care, there should be a registry for the government in the states and the federal government to be able to do this research.
So in other words, you would go to this source of data and anonymous woman A, you would be able to see she had an abortion at this point in time. She had
she died of suicide a year later. Or a month later. You'd be able to link their records and get a true count of how many suicides occurred in the year following abortion versus childbirth.
So really, we can't do that so easily here in the United States, or we can't do it at all. So you have to go to some other countries.
We managed to do a little bit of it. California pays for abortions, obviously, so we were able to use Medicaid abortion data.
Okay.
And link it to death certificates in California. And that's how we showed there was a increased risk of mortality, including suicide and actually cardiovascular disease. And there's been a couple of studies that have been done now, about 4 or 5 studies linking abortion to increased risk of cardiovascular disease.
Let's do some rapid fire. I'm going to mention a few things, and you tell me it just in a sentence or so. Does the research indicate that these problems increase or decrease after abortion or are unaffected? So substance abuse.
Oh, way up high.
Among those who have abortions.
Yes.
Right. Suicide.
Yes.
How about difficulty in future pregnancies?
Yes.
That too.
Yeah, so especially premature birth and increased risk of miscarriages. And actually, I should underscore the fact that if a woman loses a baby to miscarriage, that's a trigger for post-abortion grief. So if she wasn't suffering of grief before, that can trigger it. Also, the birth of a wanted child or even being pregnant. So women can suppress their feelings about abortion. They'll push it down. Some, of course, there's different, some women immediately are in deep grief. Others are able to push it away for a while, but birth of a child or much less a miscarriage might trigger unresolved issues with a past abortion. Or death of a family member also can trigger it.
Right. Infertility?
Yes. Higher.
That's increased after abortion. Breast cancer?
Yes, I think there's good research. As you know, there was a big conference that was set up to deny it, but there's continuing research coming out, especially from China, showing abortions associated with higher risk of breast cancer.
Relationally speaking, divorce?
Oh yes, higher.
That's higher too. Child abuse?
I think there's some good evidence showing that. I've not personally been involved in that, but there is some research showing that, yes. So actually it's kind of interesting, in Teresa Burke's book that I co-authored with her, there's a chapter in there about relationships and children, but I think it tends to push two ways, where a woman's had a history of abortion might either be more distanced from children born later because she's afraid to connect with them. She's afraid God's going to punish me and I'm going to lose the child. So there's a distancing. And then there's the hovering, where the mother I got overprotective.
Yes, yes.
She's just, again, fearful.
Right.
So sometimes, and there's a number of others where it kind of pushes towards extremes.
I want to explore just quickly two other questions before our time is up. So David, you wrote another book, Victims and Victors. And many people, of course, many in our audience, completely against all abortion for any reason. And they often have to face from their friends or relatives the question about, well, what about cases of rape? What about cases of incest? And of course, the presumption is that the abortion is going to help the victim of rape or incest. But you've done a little bit of analysis of that, haven't you? Tell us what you found.
So we gathered testimonies from several hundred women who had rape or incest pregnancies. Some of them carried to term, some had abortions. And we basically analyzed all their data input, but it was overwhelmingly, those who had abortions said it just added to the trauma, and a few said it was even worse. Those who carried to term said, that was the better way to go. Most of them would advise other women to carry to term. Some were like, well, I'd be hesitant to tell anybody else what to do.
Right.
One of the main things I think was real striking is that the women who were incest victims were almost always a forced abortion, because the family's trying to cover up the incest, right? And so this idea that, there've been a couple cases in the news, about very young women who are incest victims and they were being denied an abortion. Well, who's wanting the abortion? That's not the little girl. To be honest, even a very young girl, 11 or 12, the very extreme young girls, they are, in their minds, idolizing, just a baby and dolls. I mean, so the maturity view of being a mother, but they see it as an escape from the incest. They see it as a way of, I'm going to have a baby who I'm going to really love. Okay, they're going to make up for what their parents weren't doing for them by, I'm going to love. So in their minds, I'm sure they haven't, they don't have a full sense of what it takes to be a parent.
Right.
But we don't expect them to. The bottom line is, abortion isn't going to help them, and it's not what they want, and they're just being forced into a traumatic situation to cover up a family shame.
Yeah.
And it's just horrible, really. But in part, to me, my advice has always been to politicians, and we have a section in the book about how should this be politically, is you shouldn't, because it's such a hot button issue, you shouldn't declare that, we need to ban abortions in those cases. We should be declaring instead that we need to have hearings where we're going to invite women who've had rape and incest pregnancies in, and let's hear what they have to say.
Hear them, yes.
Yeah,
hear them.
It should say, I've heard that this can be traumatic.
Right.
Let's find out what's going on. So you don't have to commit to a ban.
Yeah.
You commit to, let's have everybody talk, because instead of everybody talking about what they need, let's hear them say what they need.
Yeah.
Because that's what we really need. Our movement, more than anything, needs to have the voice, the voice of the women who've been there and the men who've been there to talk about what they've gone through, what their grief experience is, because that's the other side hates to hear testimonies of of our side. You know, they want their women coming forward. Oh, I really need an abortion.
Yeah.
But they don't want the public to hear about how abortion's hurting women.
Exactly.
Much less how they're being pushed into unwanted abortions.
Well, that's going to be my final question, a very important one. You've done some key research here. We've had a number of states now, as people are well aware over the last 2 years, pass these constitutional amendments saying either they use the phrase right to abortion or they use the phrase right to reproductive autonomy, freedom, etc. And I've been making the case in these states that, look, if you're going to say somebody has the right to reproductive freedom in all aspects of their reproductive life, that doesn't just mean the right to end the pregnancy. It also means the right to continue the pregnancy. So that if somebody were to pressure, coerce, deceive, or in some way make that woman have an abortion contrary to her preferences, her convictions, her beliefs, that's also violating her rights, her constitutional rights. And again, in some of these states where they're putting this language into their constitutions. You've looked at the question with quite a bit of detail and precision as to, is abortion a matter of freedom of choice, or is it a matter of someone feeling they have no freedom and no choice? Tell us what your research has found.
Well, obviously, the very common, it's the latter. Many women will say, I had no choice. Now, some of them will obviously condemn themselves as you know, it was totally my choice, and even though they were being pressured by others. So, but I mean, it's our recent research, probably the best data available based on national random sample of adult women, indicates that 1/3 of women describe themselves as freely choosing their abortion in accord with their own conscience. So these are the women who decide they want to do it for their own reasons.
Right.
The rest are all feeling pressure from other people or circumstances. They're feeling they have no choice. And in fact, 10% describe their abortions as coerced, meaning there was a lot of pressure.
Right. I'm going to kill you
and
if you don't.
60% face some pressure. So it's a gradient, okay? It goes across the thing.
Okay.
Now, sometimes that pressure can be so merely, well, I'm not going to stay around if you don't have the baby, right? Or it could be just the roll of the eyes. I mean,
Yes.
So I mean, there's subtle, just lack of enthusiasm for having the baby, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
some of it's just pure
Because that has an impact.
There's just the financial pressure. Well, if we could afford it, I'd love to have this baby. But I know it's life. But in a certain sense, it's the woman who's making a decision. I know it's wrong, but hopefully God will forgive me, and I'll just go through it and have it done.
Yeah.
And so she doesn't realize that when you go through it, that's going to hit you a lot harder than you anticipated.
Yeah.
You're going to have a lot of doubt that God is going to forgive you, even though God will forgive her. I mean, He will, but you shouldn't be as presumption, guilt.
Presumption is not
right?
the same as trust.
But the point is that for the majority of women, they're acting against their conscience, and they're paying a very high price. Now, even those who freely want their abortions, many of them are going to suffer psychological issues.
Yes.
But on average, they are going to report less issues than all the women who are at these high risk. And even, like I said, even the pro-abortion literature underscores that these risk factors, feeling pressure to have an abortion puts you at high risk, ambivalence about the decision, not feeling real strong about it, puts you at higher risk, being emotionally attached to the baby is at high risk, having more conservative or religious background where you believe life is sacred, it puts you at risk.
You're going to be, right.
But the majority of women are acting against their conscience, and the abortion providers know it.
So we were talking earlier about screening, and the screening for risk factors, including pressure, coercion, et cetera, that does not normally occur at abortion clinics. Help our viewers understand, right now, it is already illegal, isn't it, to force someone to have an abortion. In fact, it's illegal to force someone to have any procedure, right? So, however, it's not illegal for that abortionist, most of the time, to fail to screen for pressure.
Or to be openly complicit in it. Because as long as the parents sign the document, they're covered. So yes, it is a huge problem that abortion industry is knowingly complicit in coerced and unsafe abortions.
What are some of the questions they should be asking that?
Well, they
woman?
should be screening. I mean, well, you know well that I'm an advocate for a right to redress laws that which would require doctors who, if they fail to screen for all these risk factors, should be liable for the wrongful death of the baby because
Okay.
the woman would not have agreed to do the abortion if they had received proper screening and counseling. Just like that ophthalmologist, if they did a surgery on you without checking your eyeball out, you should be able to sue the guy, right?
Right.
Same thing here. I think I mentioned to you, Kevin Sherlock was an author. He wrote that abortion is still practiced with the ethics of the back alley, which is exactly what's going on. They let women self-diagnose. If you got the money, we're going to do the abortion. We don't care if it hurts you or not.
You self-diagnose. That's right.
Yeah.
In other words, listen, risk factors, that's your business.
Well,
you take care of that.
If a sex-trafficked girl is dragged into the abortion clinic, it's illegal to coerce her into it, but who's going to stop them, right?
Who's going to stop?
Because a
Right.
woman, anybody who's coercing a woman probably has power over her. And if the clinic's not trying to investigate, asking her privately, is this in accord with your values?
Yeah.
Is anybody pushing for this? If they're not making all these efforts, they're complicit. And again, like I said, they're knowingly complicit in these areas.
So we could have, even though, again, in and of itself, an act of coercion is illegal, but we could strengthen state laws. And in fact, you and I were
Right.
together at the National Association of Christian Lawmakers for a group for which I'm an advisor. And you presented this research and you presented this, especially on this point here about the pressures. Recommendations to state lawmakers, they could put in place requirements that these clinics screen for coercion, right? Or pressure. There's different gradations, obviously. That would be, couldn't you say that abortion, while remaining legal, if we just work to eliminate the forced abortions, we could end, you're saying more than half of these women are saying there's some way or another in which I really don't want to do this.
Right. Well, it changes the whole dynamic, yes.
Yeah.
Because if the abortion industry, first off, right now they get if they're lucky, 10 minutes of counseling. And it's just a disclosure and whatever. So to actually require screening and counseling means now you slow down the whole process and people are actually going to get adequate information, which a lot of women will then decide and realize, oh, this isn't for me. And maybe, conscientious counselors would say, you're not good. But so yes, it would reduce abortion rates not only among the women who are being pressured to abortion, but would reduce rates across the board. And if they faced real liability, I'm not sure if the abortion industry would even continue to operate, because they can't operate in their assembly line abortion clinics are just doesn't work with proper screening counseling.
Right.
You might have to spend hours with somebody counseling instead of 10 minutes.
Right. And a word of warning too, we're talking here about the abortion provider, but parents, grandparents, if they're forcing that young lady to have an abortion, they could be legally liable too, right? If somebody presses the point, that's important for them to understand. School counselors.
Right.
Yeah. Well, David, thanks for your work. Thanks for the research. We in the pro-life effort rely on the facts, the research, the records, and you've been providing that for so many years, so many decades. How can people find you online?
Our main website is afterabortion.org.
Afterabortion.org.
Not .com, .org.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
So, friends, Dr. David Reardon, go to afterabortion.org. It's a resource we've been promoting for a very long time. You will be able to read some of this research, pass it along to others, pass it along to your pastors, your lawmakers, anybody that you're talking with about this issue. They deserve to know what the research has revealed and continues to reveal. And let's continue to support the efforts of people like David Reardon because we have to have their backs. We have to protect their work. We have to defend them against attacks by those in our society who do not want to be objective about abortion, but rather do not want a single bad word said about it. And we have got to challenge them to do what David does. Look just at what the facts and the research and the women themselves tell us. Brothers and sisters, that is a key path for our cause moving forward into the future. So thanks for all that you do to support this work. Afterabortion.org. Go there and you will be happy that you did. God bless you all, and we will talk to you soon.
Follow him, Father Frank Pavone, Fr. Frank Pavone. He is the National Director of Priests for Life. Please go to priestsforlife.org.
Frank